So one of the House Republicans calling for border crisis hearings joins me now, Ohio Congressman Jim Jordan, and he's the ranking member of the Judiciary Committee. So, Congressman Jordan, you sent that letter to House Democrats on the Judiciary Committee. I'm curious, have you heard back yet?
No, and I'm sure we won't. I mean, we asked for a hearing. They won't have a hearing on the border crisis. In fact, they haven't had. We've been in Congress now 75 days, and the full Judiciary Committee hasn't had a hearing on anything. Not one hearing on any subject. But this idea that it's not a crisis is just laughable. I mean, if it wasn't so serious, it would be laughable. I mean, you got gang members crossing the border. You got people crossing the borders whose names appear on the terrorist watch list. You got COVID-positive people crossing the border. 100,000 encounters in February alone. 14,000 migrant children being housed in the Dallas Convention Center, talking about putting them in NASA facilities. I mean, this is a crisis if there ever was one. And frankly, we knew it was going to happen. In fact, President Trump said 2 months ago, before he left office, if you undo the policies we put in place, there will be, quote, a tidal wave of illegal immigrants coming to the border.
So the
How right he was.
So the White House still calling it a challenge, but not a crisis. And now you have House Speaker Nancy Pelosi saying this. Watch.
I think that the administration is pulling this thing under control. And I think it's important to know that. The difference between the attitude toward the people and the children is so different in just these 2 months versus what happened in the past 4 years. The Biden administration has this under control.
Congressman, I'm assuming you do not think they have it under control.
No, again, the American people realize that is just wrong, just flat out wrong. Just go back to those numbers I talked about. 14,000 migrant kids have to use the Dallas Convention Center. They're talking about flying kids to the northern states in our country now because the problem is so bad. And what's their answer? This past week, they passed 2 bills that give amnesty to 3 million illegals. So that's only going to exacerbate the problem and entice more people to come to the country. And as Leader McCarthy pointed out, what happens to so many of these kids and women as they travel, as cartels are involved, is so wrong. That is why it is certainly a crisis. And we need to go back to the policies that President Trump had in place.
As for what happens to a lot of these migrant families and children once they're here in the United States, listen to what Texas Governor Greg Abbott said about the kinds of conditions that they're being kept in right now and what they're dealing with.
What I learned in just the past hour shows that we are now dealing with a humanitarian disaster. More than 10% of the migrant population at that location has tested positive for COVID-19. So know this, and that is, anytime we're dealing with the massive amount of influx of people coming across the border, that would be a humanitarian crisis and a big challenge.
The governor also said at least at that one facility that they did not have access to clean water. What's your response to that?
Well, they reversed the policies that President Trump had put in place. The Remain in Mexico process, so we could evaluate before they come in, they reversed that. The deportation of people, they've stopped that. Even criminals, they've stopped that. And then, of course, stop building the wall. That's the problem. You got to put those policies back in place. They're common sense. They work. And they're going to have, when those are back in place, you won't have this terrible crisis, terrible treatment of people that we currently see.
All right. Congressman Jordan, thank you so much for joining us on a Friday. Have a great weekend.
You too. Thanks.